There's been plenty of talk about maddening build this and leveling tips that and so on and so forth in the time since Engage has launched. I've certainly contributed my fair share to that storm, and you know I will again. But today I want to discuss an advanced tool in your strategy toolbox nearly no matter what Fire Emblem you're playing. Couple caveats, we'll talk about that. But first, we need to talk about trade equipping. Hello everyone, my name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. If you enjoy this video or you've learned something from me, please subscribe. We're looking to hit 15k subs by the end of the year, and your subscription will help make that happen. Thank you. So trade equipping. At its most simple, trade equipping is the act of opening a trade with a character who has already finished their turn using another character, and then quote-unquote trading a weapon into their first slot. This could be a weapon from the inventory of the active character, the trader, as we'll refer to them, or from the inventory of the character who has already acted, the tradee. Thanks to the way Fire Emblem handles your equipped weapon, this means that the tradee no longer has a weapon equipped, so the game takes the new weapon you place at the top of the inventory and equips it automatically. Functionally, this means a member of your team will walk up to a comrade, slap whatever sword or axe or whatever else they were using out of their hand, and jam a new one into their grasp. It's great. But why would you want to do this? Well, there's a number of reasons, and that's the bulk of the video. There is one quick thing to note, though, about trade equipping and these tricks and how it works. Due to the way that Engage weapons work in Fire Emblem Engage, you're not able to actually trade Engage weapons off of characters who are currently engaged and using one. And I've actually run into issues with that a couple of times, where I've expected to be able to trade off of or onto a specific Engage weapon, and then realize that I can't. The only character that can engage with their own Engage weapons, no pun intended, is the character who's using them. So something to keep in mind that makes this slightly, in one particular edge case, less useful of a strategy in Engage than in other Fire Emblem games. It's still useful, and it's still important to know for other games that you may decide to play as well, but it's worth noting before we get into the actual points, which we're going to do now. First and foremost, using trade equipping, you can reduce the weight penalty a character is experiencing. If you weren't aware, each weapon in Engage has a weight attached to it, which, if that weight exceeds the speed stat of the character wielding it, will reduce that character's speed by an amount equal to the difference. This is often the trade-off for power, especially earlier in the game when your build stat is lower across the board, but you need, sometimes, that little bit of a damage boost. Sometimes you may only be able to secure a kill on a dangerous enemy by using a more powerful weapon, such as a steel axe, that reduces your speed compared to, say, the normal compact axe that you use on the regular. And while you secured the kill, that means you may now be open to a big double attack from a nearby enemy due to your lowered speed, to say nothing of the fact that that's going to reduce your avoid as well. That's where trade equipping comes in. With trade equipping, you can confidently move in, get the kill with the heavier weapon that you need to, knowing that the follow-up is to have another character move in and trade, say, for the previous example, your compact axe, back into the frontline character's first slot, ensuring that that weapon is what they'll be countering with instead. Now, you'll no longer fear being doubled and potentially losing a character. Heck, you may even be able to double yourself. That's the power of speed and the value of trade equipping. Continuing off of the reduction of weight, there are no weapons heavier, after all, than a great variant of a given weapon. Blades, great axes, and great lances all fall into this category, and while there are plenty of use cases for them, you typically don't want to be caught out holding one on the enemy phase. Not only do they tank your speed, because of the previously mentioned weight, it's literally impossible to double with them. So, by holding one in the enemy phase, you're nigh guaranteed to be pounded into the dirt, unless you're like Louis or someone equally defensive. So, get your smash attacks in where you need them, and then, once again, move in another character, trade that great weapon out of your attacker's primary slot, put something lighter in their hands, something they're going to want against multiple enemies on the enemy phase. But what if the issue at hand isn't speed, but reach? Well, you may be able to successfully defeat an enemy in melee combat, but what if there's an archer or mage that's going to start hitting you from just out of range? Well, if for example your Brave King Boucheron has a hand axe on hand, why not have someone run up to him and swap it out for his Brave Sword? Now he'll be ready for any ranged buffoons who trundle his way, and be ready to, well, huck axes into their skulls. The same can be said for enemy hand axe or javelin wielders too, so this is a very nice trick to keep in mind. Doubly so when you consider that pound for pound, ranged weapons just don't hit as hard as dedicated melee weapons tend to, so you might well need the extra power boost of a melee-only weapon on the player phase, only to come under attack from range during the enemy phase. This way, you can have the best of both worlds. Speaking of weapons with specific use cases, trade equipping also opens up versatility with effective weapons. You're probably familiar with such weapons as the hammer, the worm slayer, the rider's bane, etc., and they are very powerful in the right circumstances. That said, they are generally outclassed by more, generalist weapons in the same type, foregoing situations where you've got like a maxed out +5 worm slayer with like a crazy engrave on it, which like you could do. It'll probably be better than like a normal silver sword, but like not the most cost-effective thing around. For example, in a normal circumstance, you're pretty much never going to want a worm slayer over a normal steel sword or a hammer over a steel axe. These specialty weapons are just weaker, heavier, or less accurate than their counterparts. But when they're good, they're great. Once again, this is where trade equipping helps you out. You can use your hammer, for example, to bring down a hardened general or great knight, then switch to a more all-purpose weapon to help clean up the troops that he was leading. Unless there's more armored units in the squad you're facing who are asking for a hammer in, you're generally gonna be better off for it. So, if you don't have another kind of strategy in mind, consider trade equipping to remove such specialist weapons. Change weapon types to avoid breaks, and this one should be fairly self-explanatory. If there's one thing you want to avoid in Fire Emblem Engage, it's being broken. Losing the ability to counterattack for 2 whole actions is brutal in a game like this, and can represent a big tempo loss in the overall scope of the battle. It's part of why units with 2 weapon types, like heroes, are so valuable. They can more easily avoid being broken in battle, and have more options for breaking the enemy in turn. But what happens when you need to use one weapon type to defeat an enemy, but your other weapon type is the one that won't be broken by an incoming enemy? Well, the answer? It's trade equipping, innit? Have a support unit run up behind that brave hero, trade an axe into their hand instead of the sword that they used, and laugh as the incoming halberdier has no choice but to take a counterattack to the face for her trouble. Change from bows to melee. Trade equipping can also be of great use to mixed ranged and melee attackers such as bow knights and warriors. While the ability to wield bows to shoot down flyers and attack at range can be very nice, you will be left vulnerable if you're attacked in melee after doing so. However, since these mixed attackers should also have melee weapons, trade equipping comes to the rescue once more. Take your important shot with your bow, bring down a scary Griffin Knight or Wyvern Rider, especially maddening mode Griffin Knights with their insane dodge and massive speed. Ugh. Then have a friend draw your sword and put it in your hand for further battle. Trade around your best weapon. While this is a rarer case than some of the ones we've just mentioned, sometimes you'll need a particularly strong weapon on multiple characters in the same turn. Well, what better way to use it multiple times than by trade equipping? Say, for example, you have a +5 Wodao and you need both Kagetsu and a Diamant to use it. You can have one take their turn, get a big crit, finish off a scary enemy, whatever it is you need them to do. Then, you can use another character, or 2, to pull it off and pass it to the other. It's absolutely not the most efficient in terms of turn economy, but sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do, you know? And you can't do that if you don't know all the tools in the box, and this is one of them. Consider it when you need it. It's not going to be something you use in every battle or on every turn, but when you need it, it's there. Swap to weaker weapons to prevent kills, or swap to stronger weapons to secure kills. Sometimes you have a character on the front line because they can soak hits and weaken the enemy, but they don't really need the XP that you get from finishing enemies off, and you don't really want them to get that XP. Early game Vander, we're looking at you. So, maybe you don't really want them to have the biggest, baddest weapon equipped that they can. However, those very characters are often the ones that you need in the moment to defeat big threats with big weapons. So, what to do? You guessed it, trade equipping. After your big attack with your ace fighter, trade a weak weapon into their grip. Now, they'll still be dealing damage to soften up the enemy, while hopefully not taking kills that could go to your more vulnerable teammates. On the flip side, what if you needed to soften up one enemy but slay out on the enemy phase? Same deal applies. Do what you need to do to soften up one enemy, then trade your proper weapon on and let the enemy phase fun begin. Either way, it'll work for you. And before you ask, what scenario would I need that in? Say you've been feeding a whole bunch of kills to Louis, right? One of the strongest characters, if not the strongest character in the game, in the early game. he's going to get a lot of XP very quickly. But you don't always want him to get every kill. You probably have other characters that you want to at least get levels to use temporarily, or because you're planning on taking them to the end game, whatever. Well, maybe you run up with Louis, have him javelin a nearby enemy, weaken them, make it easier for someone like Boucheron or Clan or Celine or Allier even to finish it off, get the XP. But there's a couple of scary enemies that you know you really kind of need Louis to finish off on the enemy phase. Say maybe you have a Rider's Bane and there's a scary Paladin coming in, whatever. Trade that Rider's Bane on. Your weaker unit can get the kill on the enemy that Louis weakened with the Javelin. You fight the Paladin on the enemy phase. Bada bing, bada boom. Bob's your uncle. You're good. And that, my fellow tacticians, are the ins and outs of trade equipping. Remember, this is a trick that will not only work in Fire Emblem Engage, which I know is what most people are playing right now, but if you're getting into the series as a whole, you're maybe started with Awakening or even like Three Houses or Engage, and you want to go back, play some of those older games, this is absolutely a technique that you can use in the majority of those games. Pretty much any Fire Emblem game that allows multiple weapons will allow you to do this. Sorry, Shadows of Valencia, you're SOL here. If you need to adjust your combat capabilities on the fly, and you often will, especially in some of those older games where you've got less combat capabilities available to you, this is a great way to do it without wasting a dance. I hope you find it useful, and thank you for watching. If you have any other helpful uses for trade equipping or similar topics that you feel I should cover or that you would like to see me do a guide on, strike up a conversation in the comments. That said, my name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. I hope you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there. And remember, be good to each other. Bye now.